Jim Butcher. I've run across this author several times now while browsing through Audible's catalogue. I never really knew who he was or what kind of books he wrote, but I always remarked how awesome of a name he had. Well, finally I gave in to my curiosities, picked up one of his books, and through this video we'll see if his writing lives up to his name. From the thumbnail, you probably already know that I'll be looking at Furies of Calderon, the first book in the Codex Alera series, and this is actually one of Jim Butcher's earlier works, published around the year 2004. In terms of overall theme and storytelling, I'd place this book in the young adult fantasy genre, although the novel also contains some more mature topics sprinkled throughout its length, so it's definitely meant for an 18+ audience. The story of Furies of Calderon is set in a fantastical version of the Roman Empire, or at least a fictional empire strongly inspired by it, and most of its narration is split between its two main protagonists. The first of which is a recently graduated royal spy/special agent with magical abilities, and the second is a young shepherd boy living on the outskirts of civilization, both of which inevitably get tangled up in a plot to stop a coup within their kingdom. After the initial few chapters, where most of this basic character development and world building gets introduced, the novel for the most part turns into an adventure story all the way up to the big climax at the very end of the novel. The rest of the novel's storytelling is then further divided between some of the supporting cast, like the boy's family members and even a few of the main villain characters. Which is really nice since we get to see both perspectives of the conflict, plus it helps to give the antagonists a bit more depth and backstory, so the villain characters aren't being evil for the sake of being evil. And everything that I've described thus far is presented through a third-person past tense prose. Moving on to the subgenre composition of Furies of Calderon, you'll find that it's quite basic in its structure, although it gets the job done, so that's by no means a bad thing. Throughout your read-through, you'll find that the two main elements driving the plot along are the drama and action, which is an elegant way of saying that throughout most of the novel's story, the characters either spend their time talking about what important things have to get done, or killing each other to achieve aforementioned goals. The action elements are most pronounced in the very beginning and in the last 15% of the novel, although they're practically a constant presence throughout the entire story. These are mostly made up of sword fights mixed with various magical abilities. In general, I found these elements quite entertaining, especially when only a handful of combatants were involved in a fight, but some of the novel's larger battle set pieces were a bit hit or miss, since they quickly became somewhat confusing and overwhelming. I've got another pet peeve to add, but it's a bit too spoilery for this review, so I'll keep it for the discussion video next week. Next up are the dramatic elements, which are pretty self-explanatory, I think. Characters talk, plot gets conveyed, and that's pretty much it. I've got nothing else noteworthy to add on this subject, so let's move on to some of the more supporting subgenre elements, starting with the combination of world building and fantasy. These, for the most part, tackle some of the magical abilities present in this fictional world, as well as some of the cultures, countries, and political systems that tie into the story's plot, and thankfully all of this isn't overdone, and I'd even go as far to say that I would have liked a bit more information on the magical powers in this world, and how they work and what their limitations are. But I'm guessing the author is just saving that for the upcoming installments in the series. As for the romance elements, I basically expected these to show up as soon as both the protagonists got introduced. I mean, whenever you have a male and female protagonist in a young adult fantasy novel, a romance subplot is almost a must. And while that prediction of mine did come true in the end, boy did it not go the way that I expected. But in the end, everything turned out cute and wholesome, so there's not much to complain there. Lastly, there's also a handful of psychological themes present, and these partially tie into one of the magical subspecializations in this world, as well as to some of the binds our protagonists get themselves into along their journeys. For my overall opinion on Furies of Calderon, I'll say it's an alright read. It definitely isn't one of the best books I've ever read, but at the same time I'd be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy myself during my read through of the novel. The first thing I really liked about the book was its story. True, it might be a bit predictable in its broad strokes, but I found that the individual subplots of its characters were more than interesting enough to keep me engaged and wondering what would happen to the characters next, or how they would overcome the challenges presented before them. The second thing I liked about the novel were the characters themselves. They're all really interesting in their own regards, plus they've all got an element of mystery tied to their backstories, which I found made me far more invested in them as a whole. There's also plenty of character development happening throughout the length of the novel, and this doesn't only apply to the two main protagonists, but also to the supporting cast, which I found made the events in the story feel far more meaningful and lifelike, as opposed to everything in the world rotating around the main protagonists. The one thing that did kind of bug me about Furies of Calderon was Jim Butcher's writing style. Specifically, I noticed that the author had a tendency of repeating the same words multiple times within a given paragraph, which created a sort of echoing effect that would distract me from the story. And more often than not, I felt that these repetitions could have been quite simply avoided through the use of synonyms or by rephrasing a sentence or two. But I'll cover this in more detail in my writing-oriented video on this book in a couple weeks' time. Other than that, Furies of Calderon is in general a quite well-received book and hovers between the 4.0 to 4.5 star rating mark on the usual sites I feature in these reviews. If what you heard thus far sounds interesting to you, then you can pick up a copy of Furies of Calderon in ebook, paperback, mass paperback, hardcover copies, as well as an audiobook narrated by Kate Reading. As all fantasy novels, the book is quite meaty, coming in at a length of just under 20 hours for the audiobook version, or 130,000 words for the printed versions. Pricing-wise, the ebook comes in cheapest as usual, at a price of just above $4, followed by the paperback at $8 and the mass paperback at $17. With the hardcover edition, the pricing goes kinda wonky, since Amazon lists the hardcover copy at an insane $72. My best guess is that the hardcover is actually out of print, but people are trying to sell old used copies at an insane markup. After that, there's only the audiobook left, which as standard is listed at a price of $40, but there is a Whispersing deal available, which together with the ebook comes in at a combined price of about $17. So here you're just better off using an Audible credit to buy the book. I'm also pretty certain I saw the book pop up in Audible's 2-for-1 sales every once in a while, but I can't remember for certain, so take this with a grain of salt. But as always, I'll put an Amazon link in the description below so you can check for current pricing in case you're watching this video way in the future. If you enjoyed listening to me ramble on about this novel, then consider checking out my discussion video on Furies of Calderon right here, or maybe one of my other videos over here. Thanks for sticking around this long into the video, and I hope to see you again soon.